Hey, what's up? Push your line. It's your boy Jay from the K, and today I'm going to hit you with something different. Okay, so we're going to talk about parenting. I myself am a parent, and many of you who are watching right now, you guys are parents as well. And so I'm not going to set out to try to tell you how to be a parent or to make myself seem like I'm a better parent than anyone else, because we all know that there is no playbook for parenting. All right, you kind of just thrown in the mix, and then you're just figuring it out. All right. So this is why it's important to have some older counsel, someone who's more experienced, who's already been through the whole gamut of parenting. I suggest that a person gets someone who's older than them that can pour into them, kind of guide them along the way, give them some instruction and some direction. Get somebody that you can relate to that's on the same level. Maybe you got a friend that has children around the same age as you, and then get someone under you who's a little bit younger than you, who's just starting out maybe, or maybe they're the same age, but they're just now starting out. So that way you're kind of well-rounded in your parenting. And so I'm not about to talk to you about, this is what a real parent looks like. This is what a good parent looks like. What I do want to talk to you about really is the children. And so there are certain things that go on in a household that children experience. And so a lot of times we don't think as parents that our children deal with stress. So we know as adults we deal with stress. And we know what stress can look like in a person's life. It can make a person depressed, upset, angry, frustrated, just go berserk, or just lose all enthusiasm for life, so on and so forth. Stress can cause a person to turn to unhealthy coping mechanisms. So as parents, it's our obligation to make sure that we're equipping our children to handle and cope with stress. So the 4 types of stress we're going to discuss today is going to be physical, emotional, social, and moral. So as adults, each one of these stresses affect us in a different way. And as children, these stresses impact children in different ways as well. And so we're going to take a look at first what these stresses are, and then how do they show up in a person's life? How do they manifest in a child's life? But first we need to understand that those stresses correspond to life needs. So every human being has these 4 life needs: physical, emotional, social, and moral. So physical needs are at the base of every human being. Physical needs impact our survival. So these are things like having shelter over your head, having clothes on your back, food on the table. That being said, for a better understanding, we can break that down to being income. So if a household income is sufficient and it's above the poverty guidelines, that means those children in the household have a better chance of having their physical needs met. So whenever a household is broke down, where mom and dad split, or there's just only one parent from the beginning, then that means that the child has a less likelihood of having their physical needs met. And if they are met, it's just going to be a strain on that child. And so what does that look like? That may look like that child missing some meals, which can cause stress. So a child like that may go to school and eat differently from other children. This child may go to school and at lunchtime, they're chowing down, they're pigging out, because that child, they know that they may miss a meal. And so their survival instinct kicks in and says, I need to take advantage of this while I got the chance. So an emotional life need. So emotional life needs come down to love. Does that child get love, attention, and affection at home? And so that child who doesn't get that, they may be a little bit hard to handle. So that attests to the emotional satisfaction of a child. So children who don't receive that emotional attention at home, that affection, that love, that quality time, those children are more likely to grow up seeking that out by different means. And that leads us over into our social life needs. And so our social life need impacts our relational growth. And so if a child doesn't receive that love and affection at home, they may look for it in relationships. Socially, they may be a little bit more awkward socially than other children. That child that's stressed out may be the child in class who was misbehaving, showing some signs of emotional stress and distress. And lastly, moral life needs. So moral life needs, they contribute to the moral development of a child. And so that looks like the values that are instilled into a child. So some children don't get that moral construct in their lives, and so that child may make decisions that are not always moral, ethical, or just seem to make any sense at all. And sadly, a lot of times these kids are the ones that are identified as the troubled kids. So let's look at some numbers. So for physical life needs, when they're not met, those children in that situation are 5 times more likely to end up in childhood poverty. And this not only impacts their present reality, but also impacts their future potential as well. Okay, social life needs, when they're not met. So these children are 2 times more likely to drop out of school because they don't feel like they fit in, they're picked on for being socially awkward, so they just don't have a good time in school, so they usually drop out. And then also because of those experiences, that makes that child also perform poorly compared to other children who have those social needs being met at home. Now, emotional life needs. So these children are 4 times more likely to need emotional and behavioral help to cope with some of these defects in their lives. Little girls are more likely to grow up in the adolescent ages, become teen mothers. And little boys, they have a 63% higher chance of running away. So 70% of all long-term prison inmates grew up in households without fathers not getting their moral life needs met. So let's recap. Physical needs are food, clothing, shelter, security, and child support. Emotional needs are love, identity, purpose, value, self-esteem, affirmation, intimacy, belonging, and acceptance. Social needs are relationships with parents and others, education, exercise, healthcare, nutrition, and childcare. Moral needs are values, spiritual, right and wrong, respect for authority, counsel, and discipline. Okay, so let me ask you a question. Who's responsible for meeting the child's life needs? Is it mom or is it dad? So I'll give you the answer, it's both. And a lot of times, the conflict between mom and dad can cause stress levels in the child. And that could take away from some of these life needs that need to be met. So this means that it's not the school's responsibility, it's not the church, it's not the government, none of these other entities. It really boils down to mom and dad. Now, if mom and dad aren't around, of course, if they live with grandparents, other family members, whoever provides care for these children are responsible for meeting these life needs. So just think, what life needs did you get met or did you not get met? And can you see how that created some stress in your own life? Could you see how that created some problems in your own life? And then just think about your child. What impact are these life needs or lack thereof making on your child? Okay, so fathers, let me speak to you real quick. When it comes to the emotional well-being of your child, a lot of times most men think that is a responsibility of mom. She bore the child, she was there with that child in the most intimate moments. But really, the fact is that a man has a great impact on the development of a child from the formative ages. And so if a man doesn't know how himself to deal with his negative emotions, then he can't properly express his positive emotions. And that leads to quarrels and dysfunctions in his own relationships. And so with our children, if we're not able to do that within ourselves, when it comes to them, we're not going to be able to counsel them and walk them through and show them how to actually process their emotions. We need to be able to step back and put masculinity to the side for a minute and focus on manhood and understanding that being a man means also being emotional. Because after all, we are human beings and we have emotions. And so when a man doesn't know how to process his emotion, the children who live up under this man will not know how to understand their own emotions. And that's why it's so critical for us as men to be able to get in touch with our emotions. I'm not saying be soft and be weak or vulnerable, but you do want to be able to understand and properly process them because you got children watching you and they're learning from you. So love, it encourages, it comforts, it shows respect, and then ultimately what it's going to do is create a sense of value in our children's lives. So that's why it's most important that we are able to do that. Okay, so why do we want to pay attention to these life needs? Because we're raising adults, and we don't want these adults, these children to grow up and be adults who have issues. And so one of the biggest enemies of a good, stable, wholesome family is adverse childhood experiences. And so what that is that when a child experiences trauma in their life, it causes some byproducts that are ultimately unhealthy for that person. Being able to identify the stresses in your child's life will get you closer to alleviating any kind of trauma that child may experience. Adverse childhood experiences, also known as ACEs, directly correspond to things like juvenile incarceration, teen pregnancy, poor health, poor decision making, and so on and so forth. So there's a plethora of things that it covers, but actually what goes on in the child when they experience this trauma, if it's ongoing, it's going to have a long-lasting effect. Now, stress is a part of life. No one can escape stress. So I'm not saying that we're going to be able to escape stress or prevent our children from ever experiencing stress. But we need to understand there's different types of stress. So you have stress that is normal, it's healthy stress. And this could be something like your child not getting to watch their favorite TV show when they want to watch their favorite TV show. That's something they can deal with, they can tolerate, so it's tolerable stress. But then you have things that are chronic stresses. So things like missing a meal continually because of a lack of income, that can cause some problems. So that leads over into toxic stress. And when it becomes toxic, now this child is in a state of stress continually. And so it actually changes the brain. It also changes their emotions. And so it puts them into a state physically where they are constantly in stress, in a stress mode. So they're always living on the edge. Children like this, they tend to put less time and consideration into their thought and control, and they are more into a state of survival mode. And so they're living with a traumatized mind. So what does that look like when a child grows up? We all know people who just live for the day. They're just trying to get through the day. Well, that's a person who's living in a state of survival. So they're not worried about tomorrow, the next week, or the next year, or 10 years from now. They're just trying to focus on, how do I get through the day? That's an adult that's trying to figure out, how do I put food on the table today? How do I get this light bill paid? You know, those are the things that they're focusing on, just the day-by-day life, because that person has lived under that kind of stress. And so now that's their new normal. And that typically is a person who makes poor decisions because they're just worried about the moment. And so we can stop that in our children by alleviating some of those stresses for them. So we have to identify those stress factors and start to create some barriers around that, some boundaries to protect our children. And so to be honest with you, sometimes, a lot of the times, those stress factors we're allowing into our homes. And the very sad reality is the studies have shown that children who live with toxic stress, who are always in this amped up stress mode of life, physically, I mean, they have a higher heart rate. They're just always on edge. That child also has a decrease in their lifespan. And so in your DNA, you have these caps on the end of your DNA called telomeres. And so when a child is experiencing trauma, prolonged trauma, those telomere caps just start to disintegrate. With those telomeres also correspond to the lifespan of a person. And so having that stress level can actually change the body. So it can do damage to the body. So what do we do to prevent this stuff? Okay, so we need to be present. We have to be present physically, emotionally, socially, and morally. Physically, we may need to increase our income so that we can provide for those physical needs of our children. So that may mean picking up an extra shift, an extra job. That may mean going back to school, getting some more education so we can increase our livable wage. And that also may mean that we make some sacrifices for them. And we're providing security for that child, which is going to decrease a lot of that stress physically. Emotionally, we can meet the child's needs by being present, showing love, unconditional love, and affection. We want that child to feel valued and know that we care for them, and we'll move every mountain in the world to be in that child's life. Okay, so we can be emotionally absent, and that's what we don't want to practice, because that's going to lead to a lot of emotional stress for that child. And socially, we just need to get on the child's level. We need to understand what's going on in this child's life, you know, who are their friends, what activities they're into, you know, what hobbies do they have, and we can spend time with them in those areas. This is going to make that child a lot more socially aware, and in the long run, make them more socially accepted, which would, again, alleviate some of that stress that that child may have when they go to school or daycare or wherever. And morally, as parents, one way that we can meet this life need is taking that time to instill some values in them, okay? That's like a lost art nowadays. But we need to be able to spend time to talk to our children, get an understanding of why they're making the choices they're making. Let's not just beat them up and use a heavy hand of discipline when we feel like they're making bad choices. We first need to step back and understand they're making bad choices, why? And so once we ask the why, and we begin to talk to them and let them talk to us, we can we can find out what's going on with them, and then we could begin to tutor them and walk them through making the proper choices. And this has a long-term impact. When that person grows up, they're going to be able to make better choices because they practice that discipline of making proper choices. And in the end, that's really what we want to do. We want to raise thinking children who can make decisions for themselves. But then that helps us not be stressed as well, because we'll know that they're able to make the right choices because we invested the time with them to give them the moral construct that they need. Okay, and I can hear somebody already saying, but me and my children's mom or my children's dad, we don't get along. So how are we supposed to make this work? Well, like I said, the enemy in the family is conflict. And so if you can quit looking at each other as the enemy and start looking at the conflict as the enemy, then your emotions kind of fade away. Because really what's important is that child. And true child support is not the money that a person pays. I want you to get that out your head. Really what it is, let me say, that child support helps with the physical needs, but the real child support is when mom and dad both support the child. When mom and dad grow apart, that child falls in between mom and dad. They have no more support. Now they're in between the conflict. And so once they're settled in that conflict, they're in a world of chaos and stress, and you're leading them into a place of toxicity. So then just ask yourself, do you have your child's best interest in mind? And does the other parent have the child's best interest in mind? Forget about the relationship, all the bad things that have happened between you two, because it's not important at this point. What's important is both of you supporting the child physically, emotionally, socially, and morally. When that goal becomes the common denominator, then all the other stuff is just secondary. Okay, so now that we've identified what a child's life needs are and how stress can impede that, let's put what we talked about into play, and let's go out here and push the line in our parenting and do better. Let's perform better as parents. And maybe while we discuss adverse childhood experiences, you identify with that and you want further information about it. In the description is going to be a link to the adverse childhood experiences information, so you can go there. There's also an assessment that you can take to kind of just see how much of an impact that stress has had in your life as a child, as well as some tools that help you kind of get over some of that and also prevent that from being an issue in your own children's lives, okay? All right, so that's all I got. This is just a real quick video just talking about life needs for children, stress, and how we can combat those issues, all right? So if you like this video, please like, subscribe, share the video. I'm pretty sure it'll be useful for some other people that you might know, all right? So that's all I got for you guys, man. You guys continue to be blessed and continue to push the line.